Call this meeting of Lima City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the invocation by Councilor Lowe, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Bow our heads. Dear Lord, we thank you for another blessed day, just for life. Dear Lord, we ask that you work with us through the city, that we can make the best decisions possible. We ask that you touch everyone in our administration, my fellow councilmen, and every resident of the city of Lima. We also ask, Lord, that you guide us through tonight's meeting, that we make the right decisions to better this great city that we already live in. In your Son, Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
Mr. Lowe?
Here.
Mr. Tevin?
Here.
Miss Adams?
Here.
Mr. Glenn?
Here.
Mrs. Miles?
Here.
And Mr. Nixon.
Here. Are there any amendments to tonight's agenda?
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
we need to add a safety service report to the report of committees.
Second. Motion second is to add the Safety Services Committee report to the reports of committees. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Under privilege of the floor, we have two speakers this evening. The first is Bob Horton. I'll remind both speakers that council rules allow for 3 minutes. I would ask you to state your name and address for the record.
The name is Bob Horton. I live at 708 North Baxter Street, West Lima. I thank you for the privilege of the floor. You know, we're told in 1 Thessalonians 5:17 to pray without ceasing. That is to have a prayerful mind all the time. And I say this and lead into this because we are truly, in this great country of ours, in need of prayer now. We should pray for all of the families that have been touched by tragedy. We should pray for the families in St. Louis, Ferguson, Miami, Oklahoma, North Charleston, New York, Baltimore, Lima, and Wisconsin. And let us not forget about all of our law enforcement agencies that in the line of duty that have lost their lives. They've lost their lives protecting our rights in the line of duty. And as I say that, I reflect back to the 1974 when one of our own right here in Lima lost his life in the line of duty. And let us not forget about those two as we reflect back. In Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a white and a black policeman officer killed, life taken. Let's pray for those families also. We need prayer right now. They lost their lives in the line of duty. And also, as we remember, 1974 in January, on Robb Avenue, the family was touched right here in Lima. And also, what we have got to do, in my conclusion, may the God of heaven continue to bless the greatest nation on earth. That is the United States of America. And may he continue to grace us with his grace, his mercy, and his love, that we might be obedient to that cause. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is James Smith.
Mr. President,
Thank you for the privilege of the floor tonight. My name is James Smith. My address is 5183 East Road, Lima, Ohio, 45807. I am Vice President of the NAACP, and I will be talking on behalf of the NAACP tonight. I work with the Economic Development Committee of the NAACP. The NAACP has been working on the economic problems that exist in the African American community in Lima for some time now. The unemployment rates of the African American adults is double digit, and it's even higher with the African American teenagers, which has a direct impact on the African American family and the community at large. The NAACP has met with businesses and corporations and organizations throughout the county and throughout the region with positive outcomes. Some of these groups include the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services, Ohio Means Jobs, the Lima Chamber of Commerce, General Dynamics, Dana Corporation, Husky Energy, Ford Motor Company, Ohio Department of Transportation, Allen County Engineering, Walmart, Rudolph's, St. Rita's Medical Center, Lima Memorial Health Center, and the Allen County Commissioners, Pepsi, and CTEC Incorporated of St. Mary's, Ohio. Also the Lima Superior Credit Union and the Chase Bank, Carpenters Union, Pipe Fitters Union, and many more. The NAACP met with these businesses and corporations and organizations to address the need to hire more minorities, as they have all responded in support, and minorities have been hired as a result of our efforts. Also, the NAACP has sponsored a job fair, and many of these same organizations were on hand for that job fair. The NAACP is committed to address the problems in this community in a progressive manner. There are some challenging issues with the schools, the city government, policing, and judicial system that we must concentrate on because of the number of complaints filed in our office since we are a civil rights organization. It is our desire to continue the work of the NAACP in a constructive manner, but the mayor has publicly stated that he will not work with our organization, and it has been brought to our attention that the mayor has been meeting with groups and clubs in the city to discourage engaging with the NAACP. This only suggests that the mayor has an agenda to progress only a select group of citizens and would rather exclude the African American citizens in the Lima community. Therefore, if this behavior continues, the NAACP is prepared to generate attention to this divisive action of the city government on a national level. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next is the consent calendar.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that item A of the consent calendar be received, filed, and approved, and item B be received and filed.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive, file, and approve item A and to receive and file item B. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for budget amendments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 1 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Director of Utilities regarding legislation for the CMOM Phase 2 services.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 2 be received and filed and authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 2 and to authorize any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From Chief Hefner regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Alpha Medical Billing.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that communication number 3 be received and filed and legislation's on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 3. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
appreciate the info included on this communication of the bidders. And I know it worked out this way, but I'm glad to see a local company was the low bid. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 4.
From Chief Martin regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Cabela's of Columbus.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that communication number 4 be received and filed and legislation's on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 4. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 5.
From Downtown Lima, Inc. regarding a special use permits.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that communication number 5 be received and filed.
Second.
Aye. The person gonna let it give it.
Just make it work.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to place communication number 5 into council as a whole committee for June the 2nd at 6:30.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 5 and to refer it to council's committee of the whole. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I just want to go on the record that normally when we get communications like this, been on council for about 5.5 years now, we let the committee take care of this. For some reason, tonight, I was asked to place this at committee as a whole. What some may know or may not know is that when we have a committee meeting, that it is open to anyone, especially our counselors, to be there, and you can voice your opinion at any time. I just feel, and I would like it to be placed in the minutes, that this could be handled through the Neighborhood Concerns Committee and brought back to the council as a whole. But I was directed to place it in committee as a whole. Thank you.
The motion and the second, is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Opposed.
The motion carries. Communication number 6.
From the city engineer regarding legislation for dedication of right-of-way on Kibbe and Harrison.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 6 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 6. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 7.
From the city engineer regarding legislation for dedication of right-of-way on Kibbe and Pine.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 7 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 7. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 8.
From the city engineer regarding legislation for dedication of right-of-way on Patrol Drive.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 8. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 9.
From the city engineer regarding legislation for dedication of right-of-way on 4th Street.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 9 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 9. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 10.
From the city engineer regarding legislation to grant an easement to AEP.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 10 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 11.
From the city engineer regarding legislation to advertise and enter into a contract to reconstruct sidewalks.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 11 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 11. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 12.
From the deputy director of utilities regarding legislation to enter into an agreement with Jones and Henry Engineering.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 12 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 12. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 13.
From the deputy director of utilities requesting legislation to purchase equipment.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 13 be received and filed and authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 13 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 14.
From the director of community development regarding legislation to place tax assessments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 14, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 14. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 15.
From the director of community development regarding legislation to place tax assessments for specified parcels.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 15, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 15. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Next, we have reports of officials. Mr. Vince Ozier regarding workers' comp.
Mr. President and Council, hopefully everybody should have a copy of the slide presentation in front of them, and I'll try to get through that fairly quickly, and then if you have any questions at the end, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them for you. The first part of the slides have to do with workers' comp specifically, and then the second part are an update on what happened with respect to healthcare costs in 2014. The first is just a bar graph indicating the total number of workers' compensation claims that we had over the last, 14-year period now. As you can see, in 2014, we had 42, which is slightly down from the prior year. It's been relatively flat over the last 4 or 5 years. The next is a table showing the injury rate over the last several years by department. I'll draw your attention to the lower right-hand corner where you'll see that the total is 12.1, which is slightly down from last year, which is a good thing. That's a positive trend. The next slide just graphs that information for the last several years, and again, you can see that the slope of the graph is moving down and to the right, which is, again, a good positive thing. It means that we're being a little more effective at creating a safe work environment. The next slides will have to do with healthcare costs. The net aggregate spend in 2014 was a little bit over $5.6 million, which is up from what had been a fairly flat trend for the last several years. So you can see we're up by about $400,000 in 2014 as compared to last year. But the good news relative to that is the next slide shows employee contributions. And so these numbers would offset the previous slide. And you can see that we're just under $500,000 in employee contributions for 2014, and we expect that number to go over 500,000 in 2015. The next is just a slide showing a bar graph of how healthcare cost breaks out per employee, and we're up about $537 per employee per year relative to 2013. And then the next slide is just the healthcare cost growth trend. The dark blue line with the square dot points is the city's trend over the last several years, and then the dark line with the diamond points is the national average. And as you can see, both are trending down, which is a positive thing not only for us at the city as far as how we manage healthcare costs for employees, but for the country as a whole. I think that's a positive trend. So the next slide is something new. I don't think I've shared this with council before, but one of the things that council authorized a couple of years ago was a change to the city's wellness program. And what we were trying to do was to get more people to participate. And as you can tell from the graph, it appears as if we've been effective. In 2012, prior to the change, we had only 65 people that participated in the wellness program in that year. Last year, we were up to 155, and we hope to continue to grow that as we go forward. And then just generally things that we want to continue to do as far as going forward goes with respect to healthcare management and workers' compensation. We're going to continue to negotiate with the labor with labor to get to a 15% contribution level for employees. Right now, we're at 11% with all bargaining units except one, and we're currently in contract talks with that unit right now. We're going to continue to encourage greater participation in the revised wellness plan, which I think is a good thing, not only for us helping to manage the cost of health care for city employees, but it also potentially contributes to the quality of life for our employees. We're going to continue to negotiate towards a greater cost share, and what we mean by that is increasing the exposure to employees for deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums as we go forward. And then with respect to workers' compensation specifically, we're going to take a look with the auditor's office and the finance director. We'll take a look at retrospective rating. We've got a meeting actually coming up in the next week. It's an opportunity for us to potentially save some money with respect to our workers' compensation premium going forward. So, but that's all I have relative to this slide presentation. If there's any questions.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
I got one question. Mr. President?
Mr. Glenn?
Okay. On 2014, the healthcare cost per employee,
Right,
and it went up just a little bit.
right.
Then I'm looking at the health, you did a good job on this. I like
Thank
the way
you.
you got it, because you can look at it real good. Healthcare costs, is this, it going up and down, went up higher, and we are higher here too.
Well, that slide right there, compared to the next one doesn't consider changes in headcount.
Oh, okay.
So you got to realize that.
Yeah, realize.
Whereas the slide before that, the bar graph does it adjusts for that in effect. So
Now, do we look at, like for the state we made sure we looked at the illness we have and
right,
percentage. I know we can't put it on here.
right,
And then we look at ways of, if that injuries, they have that same problem, we try to find ways of educating the staff on it so we can get this down right here, because we don't want to see that up right there.
That's
It's
right.
moved up, the
That's
bracket that moved up a lot there.
that's correct.
Okay.
What we're trying to do with the wellness program is we focus on metabolic syndrome.
Oh, okay.
And metabolic syndrome is a condition that is, well, people that have metabolic syndrome, it's generally an indicator that they're at risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which can lead to all sorts of health
Right.
complications going forward. And so what our team does is try to work on that, and the measures that we use in our wellness program are designed to help people identify if they're at risk for metabolic syndrome. And then if they are, we have some clinical support through WCORA, that will intervene with people that are, at least those that choose to participate in the wellness program, and help them develop strategies as to how they eat and how they exercise that'll help them get to minimize the risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which is one of the key things, key cost exposures that we have with our health plan. And then with respect to workers' compensation, the retrospective rating opportunity that we're looking at, it potentially means we'll be taking a little bit, the city will take a little bit more risk, but it does have a significant savings opportunity. And like I say, we're going to meet with a representative with the auditor and the finance director to take a look at something. And if that's determined to be a good plan, we'll bring that to council for council's
Great.
approval.
Yeah, it's a good job here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Mr. Schuster. Next on the agenda is the Safety Services Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Safety Services Committee met on 5/11/15 to talk about parking in the grass and specific parking areas. And all members of council were given a copy of the minutes and given a chance to read, and so I asked that to be received and filed. And
Second.
Motion the second is to receive, file, and approve the committee report as submitted by Councilor Gordon. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
I just got a couple words on there. I want to thank you guys, Tom and Todd. I had an opportunity to talk to some of the folks at the Neighborhood Association. They're very excited about this coming in. And like I told them, we got to talk about it first and vote on it, and it's good to go. And because they see so many people continue doing this with the driving on there, and they hope that we got someone to mandate it, though. You know, I know Tony has said they will make the phone call to the police department, right? The calls from the neighbors go to the police department about cars on the drive in the yard.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I make sure. I know I told them the right thing then, that's where the calls be made. And also, I know council's gonna be looking at it too. You know, gonna make sure this does not continue to happen. But I thank you two guys so much for working hard putting that together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean?
I know this is Mr. Tebbins brought it forth, and I appreciate everyone's work on it, but Tom was pretty, had this pretty much mapped
Right.
out before we got to it, and I appreciate that help, so.
Yeah, you handled it all.
Him and the law director, so thank you for that.
Mr. President?
Thank you. Mr. Tevin?
I want to thank the committee for taking this up as quickly as you did so that we could get to this point that we have the legislation on tonight's agenda. It's another tool in the toolbox, and I appreciate also the department heads and their willingness to engage and accept these additional responsibilities. It will make a difference, and I think that the residents who have complaints are going to be pleased with the speed with which we can react to them. So thank you to the committee for your work.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Ordinance 8415.
This is a third reading authorizing the mayor to terminate an easement agreement established in ordinance number 12755.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 084-15 be passed on its third reading.
Second.
Motion the second is to pass ordinance 8415 on its third reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles? Yes. Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
yes,
And Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Ordinance 8415 has been passed on its third reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 9815.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 9815 be passed on its first reading.
Second?
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 9815 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles? Yes. Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
yes,
And Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Ordinance 9815 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 9915.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 9915 be passed on its first reading.
Second?
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 9915 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
And Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 9915 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 115.
Authorizing the mayor to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the construction of certain sidewalks for the 2015 combined sidewalk project.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 100-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion on the second is to pass ordinance 115 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
And Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 115 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10115.
Amending the 2015 annual budget.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that ordinance 10115 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion on the second is to pass ordinance 10115 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 10115 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10215.
Amending section 244.44 of the codified ordinances of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that ordinance 10215 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 10215 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
And Mr. McLean?
Yes.
The motion, the second, is to, the motion, ordinance 10215 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10315.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Alpha Medical Billing.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that ordinance 10315 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
Happens to the best of us, Mr. Lowe. Motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 10315 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I
Glenn?
was going to echo what Ms. Adams has said. I'm very happy that we got someone local for our building. That's great. That's fantastic. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Is there any further discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 10315 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10415.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Cabela's of Columbus, number 42, to sell forfeited firearms.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that ordinance 10415 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 10415 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 10415 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10515.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with URS Engineers.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean?
I move that ordinance 10515 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 10515 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 10515 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10615.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Jones and Henry Engineers.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 10615 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass ordinance 10615 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 10615 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 10715.
Authorizing the mayor to grant an easement to American Electric Power.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that ordinance 107-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 107-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
if I could ask Mr. Stolley, maybe to give us a status of Simmons Field and what we've been passing tonight as far as the dugout, now this with the lighting, where we're at, and when the season kind of kicks off.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Ms. Adams. Mr. President, members of council, the process at Simmons continues. We have all of the lighting towers, bases, I should say, in place. The dugout slabs are poured. We're waiting on a couple of certain blocks, the corner blocks, to show up. They're scheduled in for tomorrow. That looks like we'll have the dugouts then starting to come out. They're actually walkouts. The slab is poured. They're right at ground level. An awful lot of work has been done to the field, of course, as is every year, in preparation of the season to begin. So schedule is, the first home game is scheduled for June the 4th. And there are a couple exhibition games prior to that. I think the 31st is the first date where an exhibition game is scheduled. And then the first part of June, either the second or third, I'm not real sure, but I do know opening night is scheduled with Salina on June the 4th. So we got a lot to get done yet. Mother Nature just hasn't been as kind to us this spring as we anticipated. Also, we've quite frankly run into some issues with putting the cement pillars in the ground that the posts or the metal towers go over. We've gotten around that now. They're all poured and ready to go. As you all know, that site is a former city dump, and we recognize that going into this process, and we've dealt with it, and with the help of a couple different divisions in the city to help us get through this process, we're moving forward. So we're ready to turn the lights on here in a couple weeks and make it a great season for the Lima Locos.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Stolley. Thank you, Ms. Adams. Is there any further discussion? All those, will have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 107-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 108-15.
Authorizing the mayor to accept an easement from Ben Roth Enterprises.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that ordinance 108-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 108-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 108-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 109-15.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for 4th Street at IR 75.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 109 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 109-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 109-15 has been passed on its first reading by a 8-0 vote. Ordinance 110-15.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for Patrol Drive at 4th Street.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 110-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 110-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 110-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 111-15.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for Kibbe Street and Pine Street intersection.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 111-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 111-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
And Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 111-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 112-15.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for Kibbe Street at Harrison Avenue.
Mr. President,
Miss Adams?
I move that ordinance 112-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 112-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Miss Adams?
I'd like to call Mr. Elstro, if I could, to comment on these past ordinances. There's been a lot of them tonight, and most of them refer to the Kibbe Street project and give us an update. And I know the residents are getting anxious and looking forward to seeing this activity start, so.
Mr. Elstro?
Thank you, Ms. Adams, Council and Council President. The last four ordinances have been accepting right-of-way. The first two were in conjunction with the I-75 project, which ODOT secured to make improvements at I-75 and 4th Street, and asked the city to accept those easements. It did not cost us anything. The last two ordinances are to accept right-of-way necessary for the Kibbe Street reconstruction project. This project is the largest capital project for the Public Works Department this season. The price tag is about $2.3 million. As the council is aware, we, Public Works Department, Engineering Department, have been assembling the money to push this project forward for years. Probably about 3 years been chasing money, and about 5 years we've been doing the engineering and staging leading up to that. The project is a total reconstruction project from Pine to Bell Fountain. It will be done in 2 phases. The first phase will be from Pine to Dana. The second phase, which will begin shortly after July 10th, will then be from Dana to Bell Fountain. As I said, it's total reconstruction, so this is where we have the contractor remove the existing base, build new base. A lot of the reason we're doing this for Kibbe Street is because the profile of the street is much higher than the sidewalks and the property. What that means is when we have snow, ice, and rain, the sidewalks are underwater, and sometimes people's yards are underwater. After the construction is done, we will not have that problem. The street will be lower. It will collect stormwater. We will have new stormwater drainage in these areas, new catch basins, new sidewalks, new curbs and gutters, and a new driving surface. We've already improved a few of the intersections with signals, and we'll finish up with this project. Project is expected to wrap up around October 30th, so it'll be a tough construction season. As we always remind people, if you're not going to someplace on that, specifically on Kibbe Street, try to avoid it, find an alternative path. However, there are businesses in that area, and we ask that you continue to patronize those businesses within those construction areas. That is some of the toughest fiscal years that any business can endure, is while we make these improvements. But these improvements do last. They last 30, 40, 50 years, and it's great to be able to improve one of the main entries to the city of Lima, and this does improve the quality of life for those businesses and those residents along this improvement area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elstro. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Any further discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 112-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 113-15.
Amending Section 452.03 of the codified ordinances of Lima.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles?
I move that ordinance number 113-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second. The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 113-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 113-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 114-15.
Amending section 1804.17 of the codified ordinances of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles.
I move that ordinance number 114-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 114-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Ordinance 114-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Next is miscellaneous business. Mr. Wall.
Thank you. First, I want to say, I want to give an individual a little praise this evening. I probably called this person more this week than I have ever since I've been on city council. This individual not only called me back, but came to my place of business twice to make sure the message was given to me in person, and that's Mr. Saul Allen. And I just want to say thank you for answering and being there and doing what you said you was going to do. And I just want to say thank you. It was, the concern was alleyways. Some residents seen one alley getting done, and because I was the councilman and it was in the back of my spot, I had first dibs. Well, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. And they was very highly upset. I told them to be patient. And I got another call the very next day because theirs wasn't done the very next day. So, again, for those who are having issues with your alleys, be patient. Give them time to get out there so they can do a yeoman's job as they did on North Main and between North Union. The other thing, I have a very big concern. I would like to see this go into, I don't know if this would be safety or neighborhood concern, but we have a lot of individuals on Main Street who have the hub-arounds or the mobile chairs, who are not wearing proper equipment, who are not being stopped for not wearing the proper equipment. And I understand why, but at the same time, I've heard brakes hit about 3 times this week. The one gentleman I had a conversation with, he told me that his back hurts and the sidewalks are too horrible for him to ride his hover around on. So he's gonna ride in the street regardless to what anyone wants to say, and he has. And it's bad, it's very bad, especially if they're headed north on the left-hand side of the street, because those that are making right-hand turns on Grand are constantly hitting brakes. And I'd hate for one of them to get hit. There's about 4 or 5 residents that have those. I would just, maybe if one of them would like to address that, or we can get with a couple of the facilities. I have a facility down the street where they can get the proper information on what they are to wear. I know they're supposed to be flagged and in certain vests, but they're just not doing it. And I'd hate for somebody to live with that on their conscience, that even though you're looking, you're not looking down and hit one of them. So that can be addressed, or I can get the proper information, I can get to them. Since Mr. Stollitt's here, can I get a opening day for Schoonover Pool?
Mr. Lowe, that is Saturday, June the 6th.
June the 6th.
Yes. Our staff will be coming in for orientation June 1st, once school is out. And June the 6th is opening day.
And hours of operation?
12 to 7 p.m. 12 noon to 7 p.m. And if pool, $3 for children, $4 for adults. Then we also have season pass rates. They can check us, give us a call, and get the rates for season passes for individuals or for families. We have those at the office. Also, if folks would like pool parties, they can, for extended, we do them for about 2 hours after the 7 o'clock closing. So if an organization would like to bring their group out, we're available from roughly 7 to about 8:45, 9 o'clock.
Okay, and this would be every day?
Yes,
Okay.
weather permitting.
Okay, yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
Great, sure.
And one more thing, at home, I have my granddaughter watching, Miss Kylin. And I just want to say hello, Kylin, because she couldn't understand how I was in the television. But hello. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Mr. Tevin?
Mr. President, there's a couple of items that I would like to refer to the Public Works Committee. Ordinance 113 and 114 that we passed tonight came out of the Safety Services Committee, dealt with giving additional authorizations for the issuing of parking tickets for and the prohibited parking areas. But there are, in those discussions in the meeting, questions came up about the city code relative to definitions of acceptable parking areas, and I know that that's a longer term issue that we need to look at, so I would like to refer the issue of any code dealing with that subject to the Public Works Committee.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to refer ordinances the issues of ordinances 113 and 114 to Public Works Committee for review. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries.
The second item that I would like to refer to the Public Works Committee is an issue that I brought up at the last council meeting. I don't know if I put it in the committee at the last meeting, dealing with the rental properties and the issue of, I put it in the last meeting,
It's in the
okay, so that's
last one.
already there.
It's already there.
And we're gonna have a meeting on that, okay. I just wanted to make sure that we had it referred, okay. That's all, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tevin. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. President. Had an issue that I've already spoken to the city engineer and Mr. Elstro about, but I'd like to make a motion to refer a request to the Traffic Commission for a study and a possible deaf child at play sign to be installed in the 800 block of East Albert Street at the east end at the intersection of Prospect and Albert Street.
Second.
And/or an option, after probably a traffic study is done, to consider installing, if not the deaf child at play sign, at least making the intersection of Albert and Prospect a four-way stop. Right now, it's a two-way on Prospect.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to refer to the Traffic Commission an issue of traffic control device at Albert and Prospect, and/or consideration of a posting of a sign of deaf child at play. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries.
I will be calling a Public Works Committee meeting later this week concerning the issues that Councilor Tebben had mentioned this evening, and hopefully it'll be sometime next week, but I'm not prepared right now to say the date or the time. I'll get with the clerk. I'd like to wish everyone a safe Memorial Day weekend that's coming up. It doesn't seem possible that it's here already. If you see an armed service person, please thank them for their service, or a veteran, please thank them for their past service. And on a personal note, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the council, and I look at Mr. Councilor Gordon, and I keep thinking, why is he blushing? You know?
Now I am.
But I guess he was out mowing a bit and didn't have his hat on today. But I just keep thinking, why is he blushing? So, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Glenn?
Yes, got a couple things here. First of all, it's so great when you get council working together on things. I appreciate Ms. Adams taking care of that. the guy came to me and said, I need some help about the death thing. It was in her area. It just excited me, because when him and his wife talked to me about it, I said, Ms. Adams going to take care of it. Let me text you to her number because in her area, though. But thank you for that, though.
Well, they were in your ward.
They was?
Yeah.
Did they move?
Yeah.
Yeah, they moved, but that's how got it taken care of, and that's great. Also, we, Walter Potts. Walter Potts was a great friend of mine, and he always played a father role to me. And I was talking to his daughter and them today, telling some of the things they had done for me. And you'd never know, and I didn't know a lot of things that he had done for me. And when I got in college, and I'm going to bring that up because I'm going to bring it up Thursday, Mr. Potts gave me an opportunity, and my dad had got laid off when I was a senior in college. And I was in the Frontier organization. And I was a district secretary, young guy, and didn't know much about it because most of the guys was older. And I was telling Tom Nelson that I wasn't going back to school because Dad had 3 boys in college, and I'm letting the other ones go ahead of me because I'm already a senior. And I think I can make up the following year. And Mr. Potts looked at to me and said, no, give me the address. And I gave him 130 Bush Road, Wilberforce, Ohio, Central State University. And I get the phone call, and they had told me my senior year was paid. And and then he bought my books too. So I really appreciate it. A lot of times at LCC, when my father could not afford to keep 3 boys in LCC, he put us on his program and helped us and stuff. So I appreciate him so much. I know Miss Miles going to be doing some things for him, a resolution for him, but Mr. Potts going to be really missed. He was a great pioneer for our city. He was a great man. He was a great husband and a great parent. So he's going to be really missed. Second of all, Farmers Day tomorrow at Lima City Schools. And this is an exciting moment. I love it because they get to bring the cows out. And I knew Officer Colai is involved with that, and it's exciting, and I'll be a part of that, hanging out with Farm Day, and all the kids going to come. What I was so happy about when you seen them kids on college signing day. And it was exciting, and I don't know who thought about that. That was a great move that they made when kids who were not playing sports and in the auditorium in there, and everybody signing what school they go to. That was so exciting. So whoever made that idea up, it was great, fantastic, and all the parents came out, took pictures. It's just exciting. And, and I wish the kids a lot. I know they graduation this Sunday, and hope to see a lot of people there. Also, Southside the neighborhood had their cleanup. Didn't go so well because all the rain. We got stuck in the alleys and all that, but didn't go so well. So I'm hoping one day that we can come. I know we don't know about rain out days and nothing like that, but we got another one coming on the 30th. So it's good that Martin Luther King will be backing it up a little bit, so we're going to use that facility. I had an opportunity to talk to a guy from Ypsilanti, Michigan. He's very interested into bringing rehabilitating houses. So I'm going to meet with him a little bit more, get some more information, and meet with Amy and see what we can do about rehabilitation of housing, how we go about the taxes on the houses, what can we do. But he got a group, or his company is going to come in and look at some of the houses. I'm going down there Friday and make sure the company, what the company can offer for the city of Lima, that we can do some of these houses here. Because no houses been built when they get torn down in them areas. And I'm looking at population, I'm looking at land in other areas, some of the houses he said he can save. He came down this weekend, looked at some of the houses. So we're going to see what we can do on that and see what rules and policy that we can get through and make sure that everything go legit on the houses. He want everyone to be a homeowner. And I'm excited about that because that's one of my wishes, to make sure everyone a homeowner. You shouldn't have to rent. Try to be a homeowner. I know some of the houses too high, but he's going to make it low enough to help them out. So we're going to try to make sure we meet with Superior Credit Union, Chase Bank in Arlington, and see can we make this happen. Second of all, on the ban of the box, and I remember I brought this about 4 months ago, and try to make sure that we take the felon off the box. And if you guys read in the newspaper Saturday, See, the state of Ohio is buying into it now, and starting June the 1st, Ohio Civil Service, all civil service application would not have nothing dealing with felon on the application. I want to commend Gary Moore, Director of DRC, Department Correctional. He's starting that. It's a great article on it. He explained how he want to help people out in our community, in our state. How many people, 1.7 million people in Ohio have some kind of record. So we appreciate that he started off the state of Ohio, the ballot box. They will take the felon off this Ohio Civil Service application June the 1st. Very excited. And I know all of us have been doing a lot of work. We got people in Franklin County, Fostoria, Toledo. We all been working together, and this was one of our biggest one we hit real good there when the state of Ohio is stepping up to the plate and changing that. Also, I got a call from CSF, and they said someone said it was in the newspaper Saturday that they will be cleaning that railroad up. I know some of the people want to go in there. We're not allowed to touch the railroad. Please don't go out there doing anything. They will be doing it in 2 weeks, and I appreciate the news reporter on that, because he got with us right away, and they're ready to do some work, and they will make sure that area stay clean. They're not going to just do it this year and forget it next year. I think we got a good understanding that this will continue coming. Also, we got a low-income housing project coming in Lima, and south side of Lima. We're going to try to be working on it. And they have a 17th annual community day, July the 18th, Mount Ali Missionary Baptist Church. And what they do, they work on, a church project they try to assist folks on everything, dealing with their rent, gas, different things like that. A family of 5, $25, $125 for 25 families. But what they do on that day, they have a big food giveaway thing, and they want donations there. And I'm pushing for this to happen because they did a lot of good things out there. Every year they have this, they bring the tent out. They have a lot of people come around. There's just the folks, whatever they need, anything they need, or like dealing with LACA, dealing with air conditionings. They just have a lot of good things there. And so we hope we appreciate that real well too, that we hope that they get some funding on that and help continue doing that. But they work with the low-income housing, and they make sure that they got something going on that. And May the 30th, that's when we got our next cleanup. And I know I've got a lot of work to do. And I appreciate the guys who brought their trucks, and I know it was raining. We got stuck a lot of time, but we still gonna continue to do some things there. And I also appreciate Saul, and also appreciate Howard and the work they are doing. I know a lot of folks said their alleys was getting done. They was excited about it, that their alleys were getting done. And Saul had said that, hey, these alleys, he gave us a date when it started coming around. Like Mr. Lowe said, you can't get everybody at one time, because everybody calling. Once they see alleys getting done, they're like, when they gonna come on our side of town? When they gonna do this? When they gonna do my alley? They skipped across me and went to the other alley. No, they're gonna get you. So just have faith in what happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Mrs. Miles?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just an FYI for residents, especially on the west side here. I had a call from a resident that had a guy from Gas American and Heating come to her house, and evidently Dominion is doing some work on gas lines here, and she was not aware of it. So I called Peggy O'Hara, and the Dominion is doing work in that area, and so I called her back and told her that it was okay to let gas in. Evidently Dominion is subcontracting with heating and air conditioning individuals. Unfortunately, she had not received her letter yet from Dominion. The contractor evidently had kind of jumped ahead, and came to her house, and she had not called anybody, so she was, of course, and rightly so, she was hesitant about letting anybody into her house here. But I tell residents, if there's any question about individuals that come to your door, first ask for ID. Anyone who is official should have an ID, and if there is any questions, to give the city official or the gas company a call here. But it is legit. Dominion Gas is repairing some gas line. This was particularly on Latham Avenue, and the individual that they're contracting with is Gas Heating and and the electorate here. And so just want residents to be aware that Dominion is repairing gas lines. Secondly, the Westgate Neighborhood Association is having their site for the citywide Pride Cleanup Day on May 30th, which is the last Saturday in this month here. And the dumpster will be located at the Superior Credit Union and the Credit Union on Allentown Road. So that will be from 9 to noon. So again, hoping that we'll get a lot of individuals taking advantage of that to come out and get rid of some of the items in their home and in their neighborhoods that need to get rid of. I'd like to say condolences to Walter Potts' family, as has already been mentioned here, but just really want to say a man that truly made a difference in our community, a man that was very selfless. He was concerned about himself, not about himself, but about making Lima a better place. And so I really want to give tribute to who tribute is due. And so as a result of that, I'm asking that council would draft a resolution to memorialize Mr. Walter Potts, and that we honor this true gentleman.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to authorize a resolution memorializing former council member Walter Potts. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, I want to say, I want to kind of echo what was already been said earlier today about prayer being needed in our community. Very much so, and I stated that last time we were here that we had National Day of Prayer, and I mentioned the power of prayer in our community and how much it is truly needed, and I will continue to say that. With all the things going on in our United States today, with earthquakes, with shootings, with trains crashing and so forth here, we need to take time to just say prayers for our country. We never know when a disaster is going to happen right here in our community. We've been really blessed. If you all think about the two last incidents that we had that were major, one with Husky and one with the warehouse, they were huge events, and they very easily could have been a lot worse. Individuals could have been killed, but you know they were not anything that anyone got hurt, but they were disasters that were in our community. So I would just ask everyone, if you're not a praying person, start doing it here. Our community needs to come together. The division that exists should not be there. If we are to prosper as a city, as a community, as a county, we need to come together and be on one accord. And so I ask that we spend time just thinking about the things that we say, the things that we do, and ask, is it in line with making our city advance? Is it in line with us going further and being the great city that we need to be? And so I ask everyone to take the time to just consider that, to ponder that, in your prayer time. If you're not a praying person, I ask that you become one and pray for our city. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Miles. Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, briefly, I want to talk about Mr. Potts. I met Walter Potts several years ago. I worked in the private sector doing heating and air conditioning as I do now, and of course Mr. Potts was an electrician. And I ran into him on a job, and I'll leave all the details out about it except for he chewed me out. He chewed me out really good for something work that I did that wasn't quite up to par. And then after that, you'd think it never happened. But yeah, I learned something from him that day, and I appreciated it. And I also appreciated the fact that he just didn't hold it against you. So I'm glad we're memorializing him. He means a lot to me. I'd like to wish people a safe Memorial Day myself. And lastly, I'd like to remind people to be good to each other.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to touch base with a couple things. One, as you're traveling around Lima, you see a lot of tents popping up in people's yards because kids are graduating. We have had a very healthy school year this year, and we have a lot of graduates, and I certainly wish them the best, and I hope that they continue on their path of education into higher education, and if they don't, to do the best with whatever they're at. And please be careful and safe as we go through our Memorial Day weekend. When you see a vet, or you see someone that's in the armed forces, stop and shake his hand. Tell him thanks, because they're the ones that are out fighting for our freedom. Without that freedom, we would be nothing today. So when you see one, if you can buy him lunch, just shake his hand. Because I tell you, they'll be truly honored just to be able to know that you care. They go out and do the harm or the work that a lot of people don't want to do to protect our freedom and our rights. So thank them, give them a pat on the back, shake of the hand, whatever you can, because they're well worth every minute of your time. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. I don't have anything this evening. I know we have an executive session. Mr. Tebben?
Mr. President, I move that Lima City Council adjourn into executive session for purposes of litigation.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to adjourn into executive session for the purposes of discussing litigation. Is there any discussion on the motion? I am going to say that I realize we better have a majority to go in. There was talk in pre-council that in honor of Walter Potts, some would vote no on the executive session because, as you, many of us remember, Walter Potts was one to loudly protest and vote very loudly, no! So, I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tebben?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
No.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
And Mr. McLean?
In honor of, no.
Motion carries 6-2. We'll move into
Regardless.
We have to do it.
Regardless.
We got to do it. Mr. Foster.